My name is Alara Vance. I'm 24 years old, and until last winter, I believed I knew exactly where I came from. I believed I was the quiet daughter in a very loud family, the one who didn't fit perfectly, but still belonged. Then one sentence changed everything. It happened on a cold Thursday evening in the kitchen of our house in Larkspur Ridge. My mother, Clarice Vance, was standing near the sink with her arms crossed. My father, Roland Vance, leaned against the counter with that tired expression he wore whenever he thought I was being difficult. Across the table sat my older brother, Holden. The argument had started small. It always did. "I just want to understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why is Holden getting the lake property? Grandpa promised we'd share everything evenly." Holden didn't even look up from his phone. My father sighed. "Because Holden has responsibilities, Alara. You're still figuring things out." I felt the familiar sting of that sentence. I'd heard versions of it my whole life. Still figuring things out. "You mean because he's the favorite?" I said quietly. My mother slammed a glass down on the counter. "Don't start that again." "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I just want one honest answer." For a moment, the kitchen went completely silent. Then my father said something that made my stomach drop. "You should be grateful we raised you at all." I blinked at him. "What?" He rubbed his forehead like the conversation was exhausting him. "Roland," my mother said sharply, but he kept going. "You weren't even supposed to be here," he said. "We took you in when nobody else would." The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at him, trying to understand. "What are you talking about?" My brother finally looked up from his phone. There was a strange look on his face. Not shock, almost relief. My mother whispered, Roland, stop." But it was too late. My father looked straight at me and said the sentence that split my life in two. "You're adopted, Alara." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "Adopted?" I repeated. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "That's ridiculous," I said. "You're joking." Nobody laughed. My brother looked away. My mother covered her mouth, and suddenly, every strange moment from my childhood came rushing back at once. The different treatment. The careful way relatives spoke around me. The way my grandmother, Maribel Vance, used to look at me with a sadness I never understood. I pushed back from the table so quickly my chair scraped across the floor. "You're lying," I said. My father shook his head slowly. "No, we just never told you." My chest felt hollow. "Then why would Grandma always say I had her eyes?" I asked. The moment the words left my mouth, something changed in my mother's face. Fear. Real fear. And that was the moment I realized something was wrong with this story. Very wrong. Because my grandmother had once given me something before she died. Something my parents never knew about. A letter. And according to the handwriting on the envelope, it was meant to be opened only if my parents ever told me the truth about where I came from. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Because the night my parents said I was adopted was actually the night their biggest lie started to fall apart. I didn't drive anywhere after leaving the house that night. At least, I don't remember driving. One moment I was standing in my parents' kitchen in Larkspur Ridge, staring at the two people who had raised me. The next moment I was sitting inside my car at the edge of Pinewater Bridge with the engine running and the heater blowing warm air that I couldn't feel. The word adopted kept repeating in my head like a broken record. Adopted, adopted, adopted. For 24 years I had lived in that house, celebrated birthdays there, graduated from school, sat at that same kitchen table hundreds of times, And somehow the truth about my own life had never been mentioned. Or maybe it had, just not in the way I understood back then. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and tried to breathe slowly. The river below the bridge moved quietly under the streetlights, dark and steady like it knew something I didn't. My phone buzzed. It was Holden. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before answering. "What?" I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then my brother sighed. "You didn't have to storm out like that." I almost laughed. "Storm out?" I said. "You just found out your sister isn't actually your sister." Another pause. "Technically, you never were," he said. The sentence landed harder than the first one. "So you knew," I whispered. Holden hesitated. "Not exactly." "Not exactly?" I repeated. "Either you knew, or you didn't." He let out a breath. "I figured it out when I was 14, he said. "Mom and Dad were arguing about it one night. I heard them." I closed my eyes. "And you never thought to tell me?" "That wasn't my place." "That wasn't your place?" I snapped. "Holden, this is my entire life." "I know," he said quickly. "Look, Alara, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down." Another silence stretched between us. Finally, he said something that made my chest tighten. "Grandma wanted to tell you." My head lifted. "What?" "Grandma Maribel," he said. "She and Dad fought about it a lot. She thought you deserved the truth." I sat up straighter in my seat. "What do you mean she fought with him?" "I mean exactly that," Holden said. "I heard it once when I stayed over there during winter break. She told Dad he was making a mistake." A cold feeling crept up my spine. "Did she say why?" "No," he said. "Just that secrets like that destroy families." The words echoed strangely in my mind. Secrets destroy families. I thought about the envelope sitting in my apartment desk drawer. The one my grandmother had given me 6 months before she passed away. At the time, I hadn't understood why she looked so serious when she handed it to me. "Ilara," she had said quietly, pressing the envelope into my palm. "One day you may need this." I remembered laughing. "What is it? A treasure map?" Her eyes had softened in that sad way she sometimes had. "No," she said. "Just the truth." At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now the memory made my stomach twist. "Holden," I said, slowly into the phone. "Yeah? Did Grandma ever mention a letter?" He hesitated again. "A letter?" "Yes." Another long pause. Then he said something that made the air in my lungs disappear. "Alara, Dad burned most of Grandma's papers after the funeral." My heart dropped. "What?" He said there were things in there that didn't need to be passed around the family. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "But there was one thing he couldn't burn," Holden added quietly. My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "He never found it," Holden said. The river below the bridge kept moving slowly in the darkness. And suddenly, I realized something that made my hands shake. The envelope in my drawer. The one my grandmother gave me herself. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Holden. I think Grandma knew this was coming." "What do you mean?" I stared out at the water as a terrible thought began forming in my mind. "I think," I said slowly, "that the night Dad told me I was adopted was the exact moment Grandma expected me to open that letter. And if that was true, then whatever was inside that envelope was something my parents never wanted me to see." I didn't go back to my parents' house that night. Instead, I drove straight to my apartment on Alderstone Street. The drive felt longer than usual, like the road itself was stretching just to give my mind more time to panic. Every red light felt like a pause where my thoughts got louder. Adopted. Grandma knew. A letter. By the time I reached my building, my hands were still shaking. My apartment was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes every small sound feel sharp. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. For 24 years, I had believed my life had a clear beginning. Now it felt like someone had erased the first chapter. I walked slowly toward my desk. The envelope was still there, exactly where I had left it. Plain cream paper. My name written across the front in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Alara Vance. The sight of it made my chest tighten. I had kept it for 6 months without opening it. At the time, it felt like one of those sentimental things older relatives did before they passed away. Maybe advice? Maybe a family recipe? Maybe a story about my childhood. I never imagined it might explain who I actually was. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. I stared at the screen. Clarice Vance. The name looked strangely unfamiliar now. The phone kept vibrating in my hand. I finally answered. "What?" I said quietly. Her voice sounded tired. "Ilara, where are you?" "Not at the house. You shouldn't have left like that." I let out a slow breath. "You told me I was adopted." "Yes," she said softly, like it was nothing. "We didn't plan for it to come out that way." "Then how did you plan for it to come out?" Silence filled the line. Finally, she said, "Your father didn't mean to say it like that." "That's not the part that bothers me." "What part bothers you?" "The part where you waited 24 years. She didn't answer right away. "Alara," she said after a moment, "some things are complicated." I looked down at the envelope in my hand. Was Grandma part of the complication? My mother's breath caught. The reaction was small, but I heard it. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. "You know exactly what I mean," I said. Another pause. Then her voice changed slightly. "Did she give you something?" My grip tightened around the envelope. So she knew. "She gave me a letter," I said. The silence that followed was heavy. "Ilara," my mother said slowly, "that letter doesn't matter." That sentence made my stomach twist. "It doesn't matter?" I repeated. "No," she said quickly. "Your grandmother, she had her own ideas about things." "What kind of ideas?" "Old ones." "That doesn't answer the question." "You don't need to read it." The words came out too fast, and suddenly I understood something. If the letter truly didn't matter, she wouldn't be worried about it. "Why not?" I asked quietly. My mother's voice became sharper. "Because it will only confuse you." I stared at the envelope again. The paper felt heavier now, almost like it carried weight beyond ink. "What's in it?" I asked. "It's just your grandmother's opinions." "Opinions about what?" Another silence. "Alara," she said slowly, "your father and I gave you a good life." "That's not what I asked." "We raised you. We loved you. That's what matters." I felt something inside my chest harden. "You still haven't answered my question." "What question?" "What's in the letter?" Her voice dropped. "Things that don't need to be brought up again." Again. The word echoed in my head. Again. "Mom," I said carefully, "what exactly happened before I was adopted?" She didn't answer. The quiet on the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then she said something that made my heart beat faster. "Some truths don't help anyone." I looked down at my grandmother's handwriting. Simple, careful, steady. Nothing about it felt dangerous, but suddenly my mother sounded afraid of it. Very afraid. "Mom," I said softly. "Yes?" "If the letter really doesn't matter, then it shouldn't bother you if I read it." She didn't speak for several seconds. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Ilara, please don't." That was the moment I knew. The letter didn't just matter. Was the one thing my parents hoped I would never see. I ended the call without another word. Then I sat down at my desk. The envelope rested in my hands like a quiet secret waiting to breathe. My grandmother had written only one sentence beneath my name. "Open this only when the truth about your life is finally spoken out loud." I stared at the words, then slowly slid my finger under the seal. The envelope opened with a soft tearing sound. For a moment I didn't move. My hands rested on the desk while the paper sat open in front of me, like it was waiting for permission. My heart was beating so loudly it felt like the whole apartment could hear it. I slowly pulled the folded letter out. The paper was thicker than normal printer paper. The kind older people like to keep for important things. Grandma Maribel's handwriting covered the page in neat, careful lines. I swallowed and began to read. "My dear Ilara, if you are reading this, it means something I feared has finally happened. Your parents have told you that you are adopted." My chest tightened. So she knew. She had known this moment would come. I kept reading. "Before you believe anything they tell you, you must understand one thing first. You were never adopted." The words blurred for a second. I blinked hard and read the line again. "You were never adopted." My fingers tightened around the page. That didn't make sense. My father had just told me I was adopted. My mother hadn't denied it. Holden had said he suspected it for years. But my grandmother was saying the opposite. I leaned closer and continued reading. "Your parents chose that story because it was easier than the truth." A cold chill ran through me. The truth is not simple. It is not comfortable. And it is the reason our family has lived inside silence for 24 years. My breathing slowed as I read. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. "You are Roland Vance's daughter. That part is true." I froze. My father's name sat on the page in dark ink. Roland Vance. So at least part of my life hadn't been a lie. But then I read the next line. "But Clarice Vance is not your mother." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Not my mother. My eyes moved back to the start of the sentence just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. The words hadn't changed. "Clarice Vance is not your mother." I sat back in the chair, staring at the page. If Clarice wasn't my mother, then who was? My heart started beating faster again as I continued reading. "The woman who gave birth to you was someone else entirely." My hands began to shake. Her name was Lenora Hale. The name meant nothing to me. I read it again slowly. Lenora Hale. A stranger. But according to this letter, the woman who gave birth to me. My grandmother's handwriting continued calmly across the page. "Lenora was a young nurse working at Hollowmere Clinic when she met your father. She was kind, hopeful, and far too trusting." My chest tightened again. I already didn't like where this story was going. Your father told her many things that were not true. A hollow feeling spread through my stomach. He told her his marriage was already ending. He told her he was planning to leave Clarice. The words seemed to grow heavier with every line. I suddenly understood something terrible before the letter even said it. My father hadn't adopted me. He had created me. In secret. I forced myself to keep reading. Lenora believed him. And then she became pregnant with you. My fingers pressed against the paper. The quiet apartment suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating. When Clarice discovered the pregnancy, everything changed. The sentence was written darker than the others, like my grandmother had pressed harder with the pen. There were fights, shouting, accusations. Your father begged Lenora not to ruin his life. My throat felt dry. Lenora refused to disappear. She wanted to keep you. She believed your father would eventually do the right thing. I looked up from the page for a moment, trying to process what I had just read. This wasn't adoption. This was something else entirely. Something far uglier. I lowered my eyes back to the letter. Then something happened that still haunts me to this day. My heart began beating faster again. 3 weeks before you were born, Lenora Hale died in a car accident outside Brookhaven. The words sat on the page like a stone. Dead. My mother, my real mother, was gone before I even entered the world. I felt a sudden pressure behind my eyes. But the letter wasn't finished. And the next line made the room feel even colder. After Lenora died, your father brought you home from the hospital and told everyone a different story. I leaned closer. My grandmother's handwriting seemed almost urgent now. He told the world you were adopted. My breath caught. And Clarice agreed to raise you only under one condition. My fingers tightened around the page again. One condition. I read the final sentence on the page slowly. You would never be allowed to know who your real mother was. The apartment felt completely silent around me. I stared at the name written in the middle of the letter. Lenora Hale. For 24 years, I had believed my life started inside the Vance family. But according to my grandmother, the truth was buried somewhere else. And the more I looked at that name, the more a terrifying thought began forming in my mind, because something about it felt strangely familiar. The name stayed in my mind long after I finished the first page. Lenora Hale. I whispered it quietly in the empty room, testing how it sounded out loud. It still felt strange, like a word from someone else's life. But the more I thought about it, the more that uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger. I had heard that name before. Not in my parents' house. Not from my brother. Somewhere else. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling while my brain tried to sort through years of memories. Then suddenly, a small moment from childhood pushed its way to the surface. I had been about 8 years old. Grandma Maribel and I were walking through the old cemetery near the edge of Larkspur Ridge. She used to bring flowers there every spring. At the time, I thought it was just one of her quiet traditions. We stopped at a simple gray stone near the back. I remember asking her, "Who's buried here?" She had looked down at the stone for a long moment before answering. "A very good woman," she said softly. "Someone from our family?" I asked. Her lips had pressed together for a second. "Not exactly," she said. Then she knelt down and placed a white flower at the base of the stone. I remember reading the name carved into the granite. Lenora Hale. At the time, the name meant nothing to me. Now it meant everything. My chest tightened as I looked back, down at the letter in my hands. Grandma had been visiting my mother's grave for years, and I never knew. My eyes moved across the page again as I continued reading. I fought your father about this decision more times than I can count. I told him that lies grow heavier every year they remain buried. But Roland believed the truth would destroy his marriage, his reputation, and his family. I felt a bitter knot form in my chest. So instead, he had chosen to destroy my identity instead. The next line made my throat tighten. Clarice agreed to raise you only if the truth about Lenora was erased completely. I whispered the sentence out loud. Erased completely. It sounded cold, like I had been a mistake everyone wanted to pretend never happened. I forced myself to keep reading. To the outside world, the story was simple. A kind couple adopted a baby girl after a tragic accident. People praised their generosity. Nobody asked questions. I leaned back slowly in the chair. Of course they didn't. The story made my parents look noble. It made me look like the child they rescued. But the real story was much darker. I wasn't a child they saved. I was the proof of something they wanted hidden. My eyes moved to the next paragraph. I stayed silent because I believed one day your father would tell you the truth himself. But as the years passed, I saw the lie growing deeper around you. And I knew that if I didn't leave you this letter, the truth about Lenora would die with me. My throat tightened again. Grandma had carried this secret for decades, just waiting for the day I would finally need to know. Then I reached the last part of the letter. The handwriting here looked slightly different, less steady, like her hand had been trembling. There is one more thing you must understand. My stomach tightened. Your father has never told Clarice the full truth either. I frowned at the line. What did that mean? The next sentence answered it, and it made my heart skip a beat. Clarice believes Lenora died before you were born. I blinked. That wasn't what the letter said earlier. The letter had said Lenora died 3 weeks before I was born. Which meant that part was true. So why would my father lie to his own wife about it? I kept reading. But that is not what happened. My fingers tightened around the paper. My grandmother's final sentence seemed to press into the page like it carried weight. Lenora Hale was alive the night you were born. The words sent a shock through my chest. Alive. My mind raced as the implication unfolded. If Lenora was alive, then she didn't die before my birth. Which meant my father had lied again. Not just to the world. Not just to Clarice. To everyone. My eyes moved slowly across the final line of the letter. The line that made my hands start shaking again. And the truth about what happened in that hospital room is something your father has spent 24 years trying to bury. The paper slipped slightly in my grip. My heart was pounding now. Because if my father had lied about when my mother died, then something had happened that night. Something bad enough that even my stepmother was never allowed to know. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. The letter didn't end with the truth. It ended with a warning. I read the last line of the letter 3 times before I finally lowered the page. My grandmother had ended it with a sentence that felt more like a warning than an explanation. If you ever want to know what really happened the night you were born, you must look somewhere your father believes no one will ever search. That was the final line. No location. No explanation. Just that. For several minutes I sat in complete silence, staring at the paper. My mind kept circling the same questions. If my real mother was alive when I was born, then what actually happened in that hospital room, and why would my father lie about the moment she died? The letter suddenly felt heavier in my hands. I stood up and began pacing around the apartment. Think, Alara, I muttered to myself. My grandmother had always been careful with words. She never wrote things without meaning something very specific. If she said the answer was somewhere my father believed no one would search, then that place had to be connected to the story itself. I walked back to the desk and read the earlier parts of the letter again. Hollowmere Clinic. That was where Lenora Hale worked as a nurse, and if she was still alive when I was born, then that was probably where I had been born too. The thought made my stomach tighten. Hollowmere Clinic. I hadn't heard that name in years. The building sat at the far edge of Brookhaven, just outside Larkspur Ridge. It used to be a small private hospital decades ago, but it closed when I was a teenager. Now it was just an abandoned medical building. People drove past without noticing. I grabbed my phone and searched the name. A few old articles popped up. Hollowmere Clinic officially closed 15 years ago. Property purchased by private developer but never renovated. Building remains unused. Unused. The word sat on the screen like an invitation. My grandmother's sentence echoed in my mind again. Look somewhere. Your father believes no one will ever search. An abandoned hospital. That seemed like the kind of place nobody would look. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. Roland Vance. I stared at the name for a long moment before answering. What do you want? I said. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. Ilara, your mother told me you have the letter. My chest tightened. So you knew about it? Yes. And you never thought to mention it? That letter was written by a woman who didn't understand the situation. I let out a short laugh. She seemed to understand it pretty well. Silence hung between us for a moment. Then my father spoke again. You read the whole thing? Yes. And you believe it? I believe Grandma more than I believe you right now. He sighed. Ilara, families sometimes tell stories a certain way to protect people. Protect who? I asked. You? No. You. The answer came too quickly. I felt my jaw tighten. You told everyone I was adopted, I said. How exactly is that protecting me? You wouldn't understand the circumstances. Then explain them. Another long pause. Ilara, some events are better left in the past. That sentence made my stomach twist. So the letter is right, I said quietly. What do you mean? You lied about when Lenora Hale died. My father didn't answer, and the silence told me everything. Dad, I said slowly, was she alive the night I was born? His voice came out low. You shouldn't be asking these questions. That wasn't a denial. My pulse began racing. What happened in that hospital room? I asked. You need to stop digging into this. The way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. Why? I asked. Another pause. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. Because the truth about that night will only hurt you. I looked down at the letter in my hand. Too late, I said quietly. Then I asked the question that had been building in my mind since I finished reading. Did Lenora Hale actually die in a car accident? For several seconds my father didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. It sounded colder. Ilara. Yes? You need to listen to me very carefully. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. That hospital closed for a reason, he said. What does that mean? It means the past buried there should stay buried. The sentence echoed in my ears. Buried. In that hospital. My fingers tightened around the phone. Dad, I said slowly, what exactly happened at Hollowmere Clinic the night I was born? His answer came quietly. I told you already. No, you didn't. Another pause. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Stay away from that building. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My heart was pounding now, because my father hadn't just warned me. He had confirmed exactly where the truth was hiding. I grabbed my jacket and my car keys. Hollowmere Clinic was only 20 minutes from my apartment, and if my grandmother was right, then the real story of my life had been waiting inside that abandoned hospital for 24 years. The road to Hollowmere Clinic was darker than I remembered. Streetlights disappeared after the last turn past Brookhaven's old grain mill. From there, the road narrowed into a quiet stretch of pavement surrounded by tall pine trees. Their branches bent over the road like they were trying to hide whatever waited ahead. My headlights cut through the darkness as I drove. My father's voice echoed in my head. Stay away from that building. That alone would have been enough to make me curious. But now it felt like a confirmation. If the truth wasn't there, he wouldn't care if I went. The clinic appeared suddenly through the trees. The building was larger than I expected. 4 floors of pale brick that looked almost gray in the moonlight. The front sign still hung above the entrance, though the letters were faded. Hollowmere Medical Clinic. The parking lot was empty. I parked near the entrance and shut off the engine. For a moment I just sat there in silence, staring at the building. 24 years ago, my life started somewhere inside those walls. And according to my grandmother's letter, something terrible had happened there that night. I stepped out of the car. Cold air brushed against my face as I walked toward the entrance. The front doors were locked with a heavy chain, but the side entrance was different. The door was old, the handle rusted. When I pushed it gently, it opened with a long, creaking sound. The smell inside was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned hospital. Dust, old paper, something faintly chemical that had soaked into the walls years ago. My footsteps echoed down the hallway as I moved inside. The floor tiles were cracked in places. Some ceiling lights hung loose from broken wires. Still, the building didn't feel completely empty. It felt paused, like the past had simply stopped here. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light moved slowly across the hallway signs. Radiology Laboratory Maternity Ward. My heart skipped slightly when I saw the last one. Maternity. That had to be where I was born. The hallway toward the maternity wing was longer than the others. Old hospital beds sat against the walls like forgotten furniture. I passed several patient rooms before reaching a wide set of double doors. Above them was a faded sign. Maternity ward. My hand hesitated on the door for a second. Then I pushed it open. The room beyond was larger than I expected. Several delivery rooms connected to a central nurse station. Most of the equipment had been removed years ago, leaving behind empty spaces where machines once stood. I stepped slowly toward the nurse station. Old paperwork still filled some of the drawers. Most of it looked like routine hospital records, appointment schedules, equipment orders, supply lists. Nothing that explained what happened the night I was born. I opened another drawer. More files. But one folder caught my eye immediately. It was older than the others, thicker. The label on the front had faded ink, but I could still read it. Patient file. Hale. Lenora. My breath caught. I slowly lifted the folder from the drawer. The paper inside had yellowed with age. The first page was a standard patient intake form. Name: Lenora Hale. Occupation: registered nurse. Admitted: April 18th. Condition: late-stage pregnancy. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned the next page. Doctor notes. Routine pregnancy monitoring. Everything looked normal. Until I reached the final report. The page was different. Typed instead of handwritten. The heading read, Incident Report. Delivery complication. My heart began pounding faster. The report described the events of the night I was born. According to the file, Lenora Hale had gone into labor around midnight. The delivery was difficult but stable. At 2:14 a.m., a baby girl was born. Healthy. Alive. I stared at the words. Baby girl. Me. My chest tightened as I read the next section. Mother stable after delivery. Stable. My grandmother had been right. Lenora didn't die before I was born. She survived the birth. But the next paragraph made my stomach drop. At 3:02 a.m. an argument occurred between Roland Vance and Lenora Hale inside the delivery room. My father. Inside the room. The file continued. Security was not called at the time due to the personal relationship between the individuals involved. My pulse quickened as I read the next sentence. At approximately 3:18 a.m. medical staff responded to a distress call from room 4. My fingers tightened on the page. Upon arrival, Lenora Hale was found unconscious on the floor beside the hospital bed. The words seemed to blur slightly. Unconscious. My throat felt dry as I forced myself to read the final lines. Roland Vance reported that the patient collapsed suddenly during their discussion. Collapsed suddenly. But the final note was what made my chest go cold. However, nurse statement number 3 reports hearing raised voices immediately before the incident. My eyes moved slowly to the last line of the report. The line that made my hands start shaking. Lenora Hale was pronounced dead as 3:41 a.m. I stared at the page in silence. My real mother hadn't died in a car accident. She died inside this hospital, the night I was born, and the last person seen with her alive was my father. A sudden sound echoed through the hallway behind me. Footsteps. My head snapped toward the doorway. Someone else was inside the building. The footsteps grew louder. Slow. Careful. Not the sound of someone wandering by accident. The sound of someone who already knew where they were going. My heart began pounding in my chest as I closed the file and turned toward the hallway. The beam from my phone's flashlight stretched across the dark corridor outside the maternity ward. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then a voice echoed through the empty building. "Ilara?" My breath caught. I knew that voice. "Holden?" I called back. His tall figure appeared in the doorway a moment later, the light from his phone cutting across the room. He looked around the abandoned ward and shook his head. "I should have known you'd come here." I lowered the file slightly. "How did you find me?" "You left your apartment 15 minutes after Dad called you," he said. "It wasn't hard to guess where you were headed." My heart was still racing. "Did he send you?" Holden stepped into the room and glanced at the folder in my hands. "No," he said quietly. "But he guessed you might come here." His eyes moved across the dusty nurse station and the scattered papers. "So, you found something?" I lifted the file slightly. "Lenora Hale's patient records." Holden's expression tightened. "You read them?" "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair. "And?" I looked at him for a long moment. "She didn't die in a car accident." Holden didn't react the way I expected. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. The word hit me harder than the discovery itself. "You knew?" "I suspected." "Suspected?" I repeated. "Holden, the report says she died here." He leaned against the counter, looking at the floor. "I found part of Grandma's old journal when I was 16, he admitted. "It mentioned a hospital incident the night you were born." My chest tightened. "And you didn't think to mention that?" "You were 10, he said. "What exactly was I supposed to say?" I looked down at the report again. "There was an argument between Dad and Lenora in the delivery room." Holden sighed. "That part doesn't surprise me." I lifted my head sharply. "What does that mean?" He hesitated. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Dad and Mom almost divorced back then." My mind raced. "Because of the affair?" "Yes." "But if Lenora died here..." Holden nodded slowly. "Then Dad's version of the story doesn't hold up." I held up the report. "This says Lenora collapsed after an argument." Holden stared at the page for a moment. "Collapsed," he repeated. "Yes." He looked at me carefully. "Ilara, hospitals don't usually write collapsed unless they're avoiding something." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked quietly, "Did the report say what caused her death?" I flipped back through the pages quickly. "No," I said. "Exactly." The silence in the room grew heavier. If Lenora didn't die in a car accident, and if the hospital report avoided the cause of death, then there was a possibility neither of us wanted to say out loud. Holden finally said it. "You think Dad hurt her?" The words hung in the air like a shadow. I swallowed. "I don't know what to think." Holden looked around the maternity ward slowly. "You know what bothers me?" he said. "What?" "If this was just a tragic accident." "Yeah?" "Then why would Dad lie about it for 24 years?" My chest tightened again. Because he was right. People didn't hide accidents like this. They hid something else. Something worse. Something that would destroy everything if it came out. Holden stepped closer to the desk and pointed at the file. "There has to be more." "Like what?" "Witness statements," he said. "Security logs. Medical reports. something explaining what actually happened. I glanced back at the drawers behind the nurse station. Most of them were filled with paperwork, but one drawer was still locked. I hadn't noticed it before. Holden followed my gaze. You see it too. I stepped toward the drawer slowly. The lock looked old. Rust had formed around the edges. What do you think is in there? I asked. Holden gave a short, uneasy laugh. If your life has taught me anything, probably the part of the story Dad didn't want anyone to read. I pulled gently on the drawer handle. It didn't move. Locked tight. I stepped back and looked around the room. Old medical equipment had been left behind in the corners. Metal trays, broken cabinets. Then Holden pointed to a small tool lying on the counter. A rusted pair of surgical scissors. Try that, he said. I picked up the scissors and carefully pressed the metal tip into the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism clicked. The drawer slid open. Inside were several sealed envelopes, each one stamped with the same label. Internal Review. Incident 0418. My heart began pounding again. The night I was born. The night Lenora Hale died. I picked up the first envelope and turned it over. The seal had never been broken, which meant whatever was inside, no one had read it in 24 years. I slowly opened the envelope, and the first line of the report made my blood run cold. Witness statement. Nurse Alina Mercer. I saw Roland Vance leave the delivery room with blood on his hands. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The words on the page felt unreal, like something from a crime novel instead of my own life. I read the line again. I saw Roland Vance leave the delivery room with blood on his hands. My hands started shaking. Holden leaned closer. What does it say? I handed him the paper without speaking. His eyes moved quickly across the page. Then his face slowly changed. What the hell? He whispered. The witness statement was written by a nurse named Alina Mercer. According to the report, she had been working the night shift in the maternity ward the night I was born. Her statement described hearing shouting coming from room 4 shortly after the delivery. She wrote that the argument sounded intense, angry, personal. A few minutes later, the door to the room opened, and Roland Vance, my father, walked out. His hands were covered in blood. Holden looked up from the page. That doesn't prove anything, he said quickly. But his voice didn't sound confident. I took the paper back and kept reading. Mr. Vance appeared agitated and left the ward quickly. When I entered the room, Ms. Hale was lying on the floor beside the hospital bed. My chest felt tight. The report continued. There was blood on the side of her head, and the corner of the bedside table appeared damaged. Blood on her head. My mind tried to picture it. My mother lying on the floor. The room silent. The newborn baby. Me, probably crying somewhere nearby. I forced myself to read the next lines. Hospital administration instructed staff not to contact police due to the involvement of a well-known local business family. My stomach twisted. The Vance name. My father had already been building his company back then. Money. Influence. Power. The report continued. Mr. Vance claimed the patient fainted during an argument and struck her head on the table. I stared at the sentence. Fainted. That was the story he had given. But the nurse's statement suggested something else. Something violent. Something sudden. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Dad was the last person to see her alive. Holden rubbed his face with both hands. This is insane. Is it? I asked quietly. He looked at me. You think he killed her? The word felt heavy in the air. Killed. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. But the evidence sitting in my hands made it impossible to ignore the possibility. Holden suddenly stood up straight. Wait. What? He pointed to the envelope still sitting inside the drawer. There's another document in there. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the second envelope. This one was thinner. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A typed memo. Confidential agreement. My eyes moved quickly across the text. It described a private settlement between the Vance family and Hollamere Clinic. The sigh. Hospital agreed not to pursue further investigation into Lenora Hale's death. In exchange, a large donation was made to the clinic's expansion fund. My hands tightened around the page. They paid them, I said. Holden nodded slowly. They buried the whole thing. For 24 years the story had been simple. A tragic car accident, a kind couple adopting a child. But the truth was sitting in front of us now. Lenora Hale hadn't died on the road. She died inside that hospital. After an argument with my father. And the hospital had agreed to keep quiet. Holden ran a hand through his hair again. Ilara, we need to think about this carefully. I looked at him. What's there to think about? This changes everything. Yes, I said. It also means Dad could lose everything if this comes out. I stared down at the witness statement again. For 24 years, my life had been shaped by a lie. I had grown up thinking I was an outsider, an adopted child who should be grateful. But now the truth was far worse. My father hadn't just lied about my birth. He had buried the circumstances of my mother's death. And suddenly another thought struck me, one that made my chest tighten. Holden, I said quietly. Yeah? If Dad didn't want anyone to find this, why didn't he destroy these records? Holden frowned. You're right. The documents were sitting in a locked drawer, hidden, but not destroyed, which meant someone had protected them. Someone who wanted the truth to survive. Holden's eyes slowly widened. Ilara. What? What was the nurse's name again? I looked down at the statement. Alina Mercer. Holden's expression changed. That name sounds familiar. From where? He thought for a moment. Then he said something that made my heart skip. Grandma's caretaker. My breath caught. You're joking. No, he said. The woman who helped take care of Grandma during her last year. Her name was Mercer. The realization hit both of us at the same time. The nurse who witnessed the incident. The woman who helped my grandmother years later. They were the same person. Which meant one thing. My grandmother didn't just know the truth. She had been in contact with the only person who actually saw what happened that night. And if Alina Mercer was still alive, then she might be the one person who could tell me exactly what happened in that delivery room. But before either of us could say another word, the sound of a car engine echoed outside the building. Headlights flashed through the broken windows of the maternity ward. Holden turned toward the hallway. Ilara? What? That's Dad's car. The headlights swept across the cracked windows like white blades. My stomach tightened immediately. Holden stepped closer to the hallway and looked. Through the broken glass panel beside the door, his shoulders stiffened. It's him, he said quietly. My father. Roland Vance. For a moment neither of us moved. The sound of the car engine outside faded as the vehicle shut off. Then the car door slammed. The echo rolled through the empty parking lot. My heart was pounding now. He must have followed you, I whispered. Holden shook his head slowly. No. He followed you. Footsteps crunched across gravel outside. Then the side door of the clinic creaked open. The same door I had entered earlier. Holden looked at me. Ilara, whatever happens next, don't let him control the conversation. I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the hallway entrance. A shadow appeared first. Then my father stepped into the light. Roland Vance looked exactly the same as he had in the kitchen earlier that evening. Same dark coat. Same controlled expression. But his eyes moved immediately to the papers in my hands. And something inside them changed. You found the records, he said quietly. Neither of us responded. My father walked slowly into the maternity ward. Dust shifted under his shoes. For a long moment no one spoke. Then he sighed. I hoped that drawer had finally rotted shut. I held up the witness statement. You were the last person to see Lenora Hale alive. His eyes flicked to the page. Yes, he said. The answer was so calm it startled me. You admit it? I asked. I never denied it. You told the world she died in a car accident. Yes. Why? My father looked around the abandoned ward slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Because the truth would have destroyed everyone. That's not your decision to make. He looked back at me. You're sure about that? Holden stepped forward. Dad, a woman died in this room. My father nodded once. I'm aware. The simple way he said it made my chest tighten. I took a step closer. The nurse said she saw you leave with blood on your hands. Yes, he said again. Then explain it. Silence settled over the room. My father looked down at the cracked hospital floor for a moment before answering. Your mother was furious that night. Lenora? I asked. Yes. What about? You. The word hung in the air. I felt my throat tighten. What do you mean? She didn't want you raised in this family. The statement stunned me. What? She told me she planned to leave town with you, he said. Holden frowned. That doesn't explain anything. My father continued calmly. She said she would expose everything, the affair, the lies, my marriage. I clenched my fists. So you argued. Yes. And then she ended up dead. Yes. My voice rose. That's not an explanation. For the first time, my father's expression cracked slightly. It's the truth. Then tell the rest of it. The room stayed silent for several seconds. Then he finally spoke again. She tried to leave the bed. Leave? I repeated. She had just given birth, he said. The doctor told her to stay down, but she wasn't listening. My heart pounded. She was angry, emotional. She stood up too fast. I stared at him. And? She slipped. The word sounded small in the empty room. Holden blinked. What? My father gestured toward the bedside table behind us. She hit the corner of that. I looked at the metal table, the same one mentioned in the report. Blood on the side of her head. She collapsed instantly, my father said quietly. The story filled the silence between us. For a long moment nobody moved. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since I found the report. If that's true, why lie? My father looked at me, carefully, because nobody would have believed it. The words hung in the air. An angry argument, he continued. A newborn baby. A dead woman on the floor. His eyes held mine. What story do you think the police would have believed? My chest tightened. They would have assumed you pushed her. Yes. And maybe they would have been right, Holden said quietly. My father didn't react to the accusation. Instead, he looked at me. Alara, the truth is ugly sometimes. Ugly enough to erase my real mother from history? His voice softened slightly. I thought it would protect you. The sentence made something inside me snap. Protect me? I said. You made me believe I didn't belong anywhere. The words echoed off the empty hospital walls. For the first time, my father looked genuinely tired. I was trying to protect the life you had. No, I said quietly. You were protecting yourself. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Holden stepped forward again. Ilara, he said softly. What? You asked earlier why Dad didn't destroy the records. I looked at him. Yeah. He nodded toward the witness statements. Because Grandma already had copies. My chest tightened. Of course she did. My grandmother had been waiting for this moment. waiting for the truth to finally surface. I looked back at my father. I'm not hiding this anymore. He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly. I figured you wouldn't. The calm acceptance surprised me. Then why come here tonight? I asked. He glanced around the ward one last time. To see how the story finally ended. My heart slowed slightly. But something inside me had already changed. For 24 years, I had believed my life started with a lie about adoption. Now I understood the real truth. I was never an outsider. I was the child of a story my parents were too afraid to face. And the secret that haunted this hospital for 2 decades was finally standing in the open. My name is Alara Vance. I'm 24 years old, and the truth about my life didn't destroy me the way my father feared. It simply showed me exactly who I was. The daughter of Lenora Hale. The woman whose story deserved to be remembered. And from that moment forward, it would be. If this story moved you even a little, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more people discover stories like this. And if you want another powerful family story like this one, check the next video on the screen now. I think it might stay with you just as long.